Welcome. In today's presentation, we're going to review commissioning readiness so that you can assess the maturity of your commissioning plans. And I'm going to show you how to apply the ICA Global Commissioning Standard on your project so you can get 1,000% plus ROI on your investment in commissioning. My name is Paul, and I help organizations increase the maturity of their commissioning delivery processes by applying the ICA Global Commissioning Standard best practices on their projects, and they're able to get 1,000% plus ROI on their investment in commissioning. The first thing I want to mention is that if you're unfamiliar with commissioning or if your projects have not gone well in the past, it's not your fault. There's limited information on commissioning that's out there, and commissioning is not a well understood discipline on projects. The bits and pieces of information that you can find are often confusing and contradicting, and maybe don't even apply to your projects. It's difficult to find the right information about commissioning, and this keeps a lot of organizations from getting success. So it's understandable if you've had these past experiences, and you're certainly not alone. A lot of project teams tell me the same challenges they're having with commissioning. If your project delivery strategies do not have mature commissioning processes, I do understand there is a lot of misunderstandings on what commissioning really is all about. You may have heard that commissioning only takes place at the end of projects, and this is a very common understanding. The problem is, though, that that's actually not true. And if your project teams are preparing for commissioning this way, it's costing your projects a lot of money due to expensive delays. At the Industrial Commissioning Association, we want your projects to be successful. We want you to meet your cost, schedule, and quality objectives on your projects, and we want your project delivery strategies to have the most mature commissioning processes so that you can successfully complete projects. And I'm going to show you how to make that happen during this webinar. My goal for this presentation is to help two types of organizations. For organizations that are new to commissioning, you'll see how the Industrial Commissioning Association gives you the commissioning best practices that you need to lead your projects to success. For organizations that are currently involved in commissioning and recognize they need more mature processes for improved project performance, you'll see how to achieve peak performance with commissioning with a new approach defined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard. In the next hour, my goal is to get you to believe that following the ICA Global Commissioning Standard on projects is the key to successfully completing commissioning. And I'm going to show you how my planning frameworks make it simple for your team to plan and execute commissioning on your projects so that you can consistently complete projects on time and on budget. Whether you work on big projects or small projects, the ICA Global Commissioning Standard applies to all sizes of projects, and I'm going to show you how. In the past 25 years, I've had the amazing chance to build satellites and rockets for the Canadian Space Agency, and this taught me the importance of high quality standards when completing projects. I then had the opportunity to work in the power industry, working on HVDC transmission projects and hydroelectric generation projects. And I've also worked on large wastewater treatment projects, upgrading, expanding the facilities to meet higher environmental license requirements. And more recently, I've been able to help other organizations apply commissioning best practices to their projects through the products and services that we offer. But I didn't always understand the commissioning process. In fact, just a few short years ago, I was just starting to understand commissioning and the value it provides to projects. I was starting out as the commissioning manager on a $5 billion mega project here in central Canada. When you're working on a project that big, it's basically four mega projects rolled into one super mega project. The project consisted of a 230 kV AC switchyard in the south, a 230 kV AC switchyard in the north, two HVDC converter stations at each end of the DC line, and four 230 kV synchronous condensers at the southern station. Each of these were basically four separate $1 billion projects, and each is a pretty large project just on its own. I was the commissioning manager responsible to oversee all of these projects, and I needed to integrate each part into one single HVDC link spanning 1,400 kilometers and transferring 2,300 megawatts. And This seemed like a pretty daunting task. How was I possibly going to manage all of these pieces of the project and make them all come together as one system during commissioning? I needed to work with each of the four EPC contractors to ensure this entire system was ready to be integrated with the bulk electric system. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could manage commissioning for such a complex project that spanned over 1,400 kilometers. My team was depending on me to pull this all together. Typically, the old way of commissioning would be to just test all these systems at the end, right? And hope for the best that everything worked. But we knew this would never work for a project like this. When 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget, we could not allow that to happen on this project. It was clear that there was too much time and money on the line, and we could not allow this project to be months late and millions of dollars over budget, just like most do. We needed a more methodical approach to commissioning to make sure this complex system worked reliably in the end. We needed to follow a structured method to systematically complete each portion of the project and bring each system online to the bulk electric system in an organized manner so everything is done safely. And also, so there's no delays in the project. Any delays to the project would be very expensive, and we needed to make sure we avoided any delays. After all, this system is supplying power that people are depending on in the end, and we needed to make sure that these new assets could be depended on for decades of reliable operation. When working on plant process or energy system projects, there are always lots of people involved. There's design groups, there's procurement groups, there's construction groups, vendors, consultants, regulators, and many more. And everyone has their own idea of what success looks like during commissioning. It is challenging to keep everyone aligned to the common goal of commissioning and to make sure that people don't go off in their own direction that does not align with successful commissioning and startup. It's pretty easy for projects to get off track when everyone starts working in different directions. And when this happens, projects turn into a big mess at the end. It can take a lot of effort to keep all groups aligned and focused on the end goal of commissioning, and a cohesive commissioning plan is required to do this. Otherwise, it can take a lot of time and money to put back together at the end of the project. I got to see each of the four EPC contractors' approach to commissioning, what worked well and what didn't work well, and there were some stark contrasts in each contractor's approach to commissioning. One of the EPC contractors chose a cowboy approach to commissioning. They had no plans, their documentation was not very good, and they did not follow a structured approach to commissioning. And I could see this approach was not working. And in fact, they missed testing of a very critical failure mode of a very important oil pump. And when we had a power outage on the project, they ended up wiping one of their bearings and destroying the machine, requiring them to disassemble the unit, send parts back to overseas factories for repair, which took months and cost them millions of dollars. Millions of dollars that they could have chosen to invest up front in commissioning to avoid these costly mistakes. Another one of the EPC contractors, they had world-class commissioning processes. Their test plans and procedures were thorough and complete in advance of testing. Their test sequences were scheduled 18 months in advance, and testing started exactly on this day that was planned, that far in advance. They had matured their commissioning processes to the highest level to mitigate risks on projects. After seeing both of these polar opposite approaches to commissioning happening concurrently, it was clear to me that a structured approach to commissioning saves time and money on projects. Because with the structured approach, after 2 years of meticulous planning and coordination for commissioning, we were able to meet the project in service date within 4 days of originally planned. However, with the other EPC's cowboy approach to commissioning, they were just gambling and they lost big in the end. Their portion of the project ended up 2 years late and millions of dollars over budget, and they lost a lot of money on their contract. In fact, their lead project manager got fired in the last few months of the project, and it was clear to me why is because he didn't know how to finish the project during commissioning. Everything came apart in the end, and he was not able to contain the mess. It was clear to me what a mature approach to commissioning looks like, and I was determined to make sure all the projects I worked on followed the same best practices for commissioning, and I want to make sure your projects follow these same best practices as well, which is why the Industrial Commissioning Association has developed the set of ICA Global Commissioning Standards so project teams can implement a structured approach to commissioning to avoid cowboy commissioning and save time and money on projects. The ICA Global Commissioning Standard was developed by a team of 20 industry experts from all over the world, making this the most comprehensive and robust commissioning standard ever developed, capturing several decades of lessons learned so you don't have to make the same mistakes on your projects. I mentioned earlier that 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. This is a stat from Professor Bent Flivberg. He's a professor at the University of Oxford, and he's compiled a database of over 16,000 projects. And from his research, his database shows that 92.5% of projects are late and over budget, and that the complexity of projects is a contributing factor to how late projects are. That's 9 out of 10 projects that are late and over budget, and shows that a structured approach to commissioning is required to protect projects from going so far over budget. When the best practices outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard are followed, this significantly reduces project delays and project cost overruns that 9 out of 10 projects typically experience. By seeing the direct application of the best practices outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard applied to projects, I was able to see how projects are successfully delivered during commissioning. By following the ICA Global Commissioning Standard best practices, this gives me confidence that I'm able to successfully complete all sizes of projects on time and on budget, no matter how big or how small or how complex they are. Developing and implementing the ICA Global Commissioning Standard has given me and my team the confidence to know how projects will end, whether they'll be months late and millions of dollars over budget, or if they will be completed efficiently to meet cost and schedule objectives. So here's what we're going to cover in the next half hour or so. We'll talk about the 3 secrets to commissioning success. Secret number 1 is why immature commissioning processes are likely the real cause of your project delays. Secret number 2, how to use commissioning as a strategic tool to drive project success from day one. And secret number 3 is how to get 1,000% plus ROI from commissioning. So let's go over the first secret to commissioning success, which is that immature commissioning processes are likely the real reason your projects are experiencing delays. Unless you're working on strictly 100% civil projects, such as a bridge that only involves earthworks, then the electrical and mechanical aspects of your projects are much more complex systems that require special attention and require a much different approach than earthworks right from the start of your projects. The essence of the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is to start with the end in mind, regardless of the size of your project. It's exactly like Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. His habit number 2 is to begin with the end in mind. No matter if projects are big or small, each project must start with the end in mind, which means having a clear vision of what success looks like during commissioning right from the start of projects. It's like that for everything, and projects are no different. You wouldn't start running a marathon without first knowing where the finish line is. You would be running for a long time if you didn't know how to finish the race. Without a methodical approach to complete projects right from the start, then you're accumulating risks and delays through every stage of projects that become very expensive issues to fix at the end of your project. Without a proactive approach to commissioning, then your project is really a ticking time bomb with cost and schedule just waiting to explode at the end. To protect against this, you need the mature commissioning framework outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard that looks like this. The ICA Global Commissioning Standard defines the risk mitigating activities that must take place during each stage of projects in order to start with the end in mind and avoid major issues at the end. The standard defines the risk mitigating activities that must take place for commissioning during FEED and procurement processes, including what is required in construction contracts to define how projects will be completed during commissioning, what commissioning and operations input is required during design reviews to capture lessons learned to align with the end of your projects, and preliminary systematization so that all activities align with the startup sequence to meet your in-service date. The standard defines the risk mitigating activities that must take place for commissioning during early construction processes, including detailed definition of your mechanical completion packages, detailed definition of your integrated construction and commissioning schedule, and off-site testing for FAT and IFAT to ensure manufacturers' testing in the factory aligns with your on-site testing. The standard defines the risk mitigating activities that must take place for construction completions and on-site testing processes, including the methodical process to complete construction by systems, the on-site testing that takes place during pre-commissioning, commissioning, and startup, and testing during performance verification and trial operation to optimize operations. And finally, the standard defines the risk mitigating activities that must take place during the final stages of the project, including how systems are placed in service and handed over to operations, the operational requirements to prepare operating teams for ongoing operation and maintenance of the new facilities, and the final tasks for commissioning closeout. The problem is a lot of organizations only focus on what they can see, which is the on-site testing tasks that take place in the field. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. On-site testing is only 20% of the commissioning process, with all the risk mitigating activities below the surface that often get forgotten about. When organizations only focus on on-site testing, they're missing 80% of the activities for commissioning, the 80% of the risk mitigating activities for commissioning that ensure testing goes smoothly. These 80% of activities, the steps of the commissioning process that are hidden below the surface, these are what makes your on-site testing activities successful. And if you're only focusing on the tip of the iceberg and focusing only on testing, then you're adding a lot of unnecessary risks to your projects. This outdated construction-led approach is what leads to 9 out of 10 projects being late and over budget. Let me tell you about a smaller project I worked on that had immature commissioning processes and did not start with the end in mind, with no methodical approach to commissioning. The project was a wastewater treatment plant with a project budget in the 100 to $200 million range. I was brought into the project when construction was about 60% complete, and the owner said it was urgent. They needed me on site right away. So when I got to site, my first mission was to quickly prepare a plan for commissioning. I joined the project in September, and low flow season testing was to start 2 months later in November. I did not have much time to prepare, but I knew I had a framework to follow from the previous projects I had worked on. So I rapidly started to plan for commissioning, but I quickly found a fundamental flaw in the project, and it really wasn't necessary for me to rush to site. There would be no commissioning happening anytime soon. The damage was already done much earlier in the project, and there wasn't much really that I could do. There was no commissioning involvement during feed and procurement, and this is where the problem started. What had happened was there was no mature procurement processes to make sure that all groups were qualified to bid on the work. And this wasn't anyone's fault. They were doing the best that they could. They just didn't have commissioning embedded into their procurement processes to select the right groups that could meet the deliverables needed for commissioning. The proponents bidding on the work, of course, said they were commissioning experts, but that's rarely true when it comes from the sales executives preparing proposals, right? A much deeper dive was required to truly evaluate each group's ability to meet deliverables for commissioning, and without early commissioning involvement, the project ended up awarding the work to an unqualified group that was incapable of performing their pre-commissioning and vendor startup responsibilities. They had no internal quality management processes, and they were not able to deliver what was required for commissioning. It was a mess, and it was very difficult to clean up. Because the project ignored commissioning and treated it as testing at the end of the project ended up 3 years late and many millions of dollars over budget, far more than the $1.5 million the procurement group thought they were saving by awarding the work to the lowest bidder. Despite my efforts to implement a commissioning process, contractor did not have the internal management processes or the required skill sets needed for construction quality management or for their pre-commissioning responsibilities, and it was a very long, drawn-out process that resulted in significant cost overruns to finish the project. A much better approach would have been to start with the ICA Global Commissioning Standard, to start with the end in mind, and plan for commissioning success right from the beginning. This was another big aha moment for me, that The real reason the project was delayed was because right from the start, there was no understanding of how all the commissioning puzzle pieces would fit together at the end. Projects are a big puzzle with lots of moving pieces, and a proactive approach to commissioning is required to make sure all the pieces fit together at the end. And without a proactive approach, projects are late 9 out of 10 times. And this is the real reason a lot of these projects are late. Without a methodical method to complete commissioning, completing projects always results in cowboy commissioning. It's the Wild West, and you never have a consistent method to complete projects, and you have to reinvent the wheel every time. And this is hardly a responsible approach to completing projects when there is so much time and money on the line. A consistent approach is required to start projects with the end in mind. Now let's go over the second secret to commissioning success, which is how to use commissioning as a strategic tool to drive project success from day one. When you're first initiating a project, it can feel like a long, twisted path to get your team from point A to point B. And it is if you don't start with a clear understanding of what success looks like during commissioning. When all groups working on projects have a different idea of what's required for commissioning and are working on their own objectives, it's pretty easy for people to wander off in the wrong direction. In order to take the path of least resistance on projects and complete your projects as efficiently as possible, all groups must know exactly what B looks like, and they must know exactly what are the priorities for a smooth transition from construction to commissioning. When I was working on the multi-billion-dollar HVDC project that I mentioned earlier, there are two converter stations, one at each end of the 1,400-kilometer or 870-mile DC line. And the plan was to have one construction manager manage both of these sites for a consistent approach to construction. But this didn't happen for other reasons, and we ended up with two separate construction managers, each with a completely different approach to construction and commissioning. One construction manager had a very hands-on approach. They had very thorough and complete quality management processes with boots on the ground, inspecting the work, and making sure that construction deliverables aligned with what we needed for commissioning. The other construction manager, however, was very hands-off. They had very limited field inspections, and they were only taking a very cursory look at quality paperwork to confirm construction was complete and accurate. Now, this was challenging for me as the commissioning manager, trying to put together all the pieces of the project and getting very different quality from these two construction groups. My commissioning team had to spend a lot more effort identifying issues at one site and sending things back for rework and trying to keep the two sites at the same pace so that we could energize the DC line when needed. A much better approach would have been to start with the ICA Global Commissioning Standard for a consistent approach to quality and commissioning at both sites. The path from A to B would have been much straighter rather than sending systems back for rework at one site more than the other. If all groups would have embraced commissioning as a strategic tool, I would have been able to guide the same approach at both sites right from day one and avoided a lot of twists and turns to get to the end. When successful commissioning is everyone's primary objective, it helps align all groups on projects and keep everyone working in the same direction. However, when commissioning is overlooked, you get groups that are working in their own direction and they lose focus of what success looks like at the end. What this made me realize is that commissioning is more about being a conductor. Using commissioning as a strategic tool allows you to identify risks much earlier in projects and keep everyone aligned on the most fundamental goal of the project, which is always to achieve smooth commissioning to meet your project cost and schedule objectives. It's not about testing at the end. It's about guiding the project team so that all moving parts come together seamlessly. A mature commissioning process makes integration happen effortlessly and keep everyone focused with their eye on the prize for a strong project finish. When you have commissioning involved in your project right from the start, who can see the bigger picture of the commissioning process, commissioning acts as the conductor to lead your project to success from A to B in the straightest line possible for maximum efficiency. You get continuity from start to finish of your projects, and the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is your guideline to keep your project going in the right direction. Now let's go over the third secret to commissioning success, which is how to get 1,000% plus ROI on commissioning. You may be thinking, everything we've discussed so far, this all sounds great, but what is the cost and what do I get in return? It's all too common that commissioning is viewed as an expense rather than as an opportunity to save time and money on projects. But there is a long list of case studies that demonstrate the ROI companies achieve when they implement mature commissioning processes, and I'll show you how. There are some common misconceptions that prevent organizations from getting an ROI from commissioning. Some organizations still believe commissioning is just testing at the end of projects, or worse, some still believe that completing construction is the end of the project. Many organizations don't see any value to hire commissioning folks at the beginning of projects, or they think they can just get their contractor to take care of commissioning, right? Organizations might think commissioning is an extra expense that they can cut to save money, and they're just too busy at the beginning of projects to even consider commissioning. They'd rather just focus on getting contracts awarded and get the project started and figure out commissioning later. These are all common narratives in the industry, and most projects start this way. These messages, I hear them from all people working on all types of projects all over the world, which is why 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. While we were working on the Bipole 3 power project in central Canada, the $5 billion mega project I mentioned earlier, there was a similar power project taking place at the same time on the east coast of Canada, and it was called Muskrat Falls. Both of these projects were multi-billion dollar HVDC transmission projects, and it was interesting because these very similar projects were happening at the same time, and we could compare the different approaches that management was taking for commissioning. Now, I wasn't involved in the Muskrat Falls project, but the project didn't turn out too well and resulted in a public inquiry titled Muskrat Falls, a Misguided Project. You can read this report. It's available online at muskratfallsinquiry.ca, and the report makes it pretty easy to see what took place during the project. On Bipole 3, management had a very proactive approach to commissioning, and I commend them for that. I was involved in the project as the commissioning manager right from the start, and this allowed me to participate in design processes, offsite testing in the factory, and construction processes on site, and to work with all the EPC contractors, PhD experts, and operational teams to plan for successful commissioning and startup. One thing I want to highlight is the contrasting approach to offsite testing between these two projects. On an HVDC project, the control and protection systems are quite complex to manage 2,300 megawatt transfers between converter stations that are 1,400 kilometers apart from each other. Our team of HVDC experts recognized this very early and planned for 6 months of integrated factory acceptance testing to perform functional and dynamic testing on the 60 control and protection cubicles in the factory before they were split, and 30 were shipped to the north site and 30 were shipped to the south site. There was, of course, lots of pressure to release these cubicles from the factory because they were urgently needed at site for installation, but we knew that these cubicles must work before leaving the factory if on-site testing was to go smoothly. And sure enough, with this approach, on-site testing was a breeze. The only thing to find was a few small wiring errors that were pretty easy to fix. But this early approach to testing both hardware and software in the factory saved a lot of time during on-site testing because we knew everything worked before it even arrived at site. Now, contrast that to the approach management took on the Muskrat Falls control and protection cubicles. The project ended up years late and millions or even billions of dollars over budget. I don't know what the final figure ever was. These were the headlines that were published at the time in March 2022. Software struggles persist. Completion impossible to predict. In June of 2022, software troubles blamed for $260 million cost increase. And in March 2023, Muskrat Falls discovers new problems, and you go read the article. It describes the problems as testing software at full power capacity. Now, you can see by these headlines, they're still developing software for control and protection at a very late stage in the project. These software problems can only exist if the cubicles left the factory without being fully factory acceptance tested. And I don't know how much time and money the project thought they were saving by rushing cubicles to site to be installed, but I'm sure it was less than the resulting years of delays and millions of dollars in over expenditures. So I can't comment too much more on Muskrat Falls because I wasn't there, but from the public inquiry and these public headlines, you can see the two different approaches that management took for commissioning and the resulting public scrutiny that Muskrat Falls had to endure by deferring commissioning to later stages in the project. No management team wants a public inquiry document titled A Misguided Project. The cost of commissioning on projects is typically less than 5% of your overall project budget. But as you can see from the Muskrat Falls project, the cost of delays during commissioning can be astronomical, and you must do everything you can to protect your critical path during commissioning. The return on investment to protect your project from delays easily exceeds 1,000%. For example, if the cost to perform integrated factory acceptance testing to properly test the control and protection cubicles in the factory was an additional, say, $12 million on the Muskrat Falls project, which is still a big number, it probably wouldn't have been that much. This could have avoided the $260 million cost increase we just looked at due to the software problems late in the project. Spending $12 million to save $260 million, that's an ROI of 2,100%. And that's just one example on this project. There's lots of opportunities to get this kind of ROI when you proactively address risks with a robust commissioning strategy. And this doesn't just apply to multi-billion dollar mega projects. You get this ROI on all sizes of projects. I've got lots of case studies showing the ROI that projects achieve when they make an upfront investment in commissioning. The upfront investment in commissioning and implementation of a mature commissioning process as defined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is an excellent investment and ROI to protect your project from ending badly, in addition to avoiding a public inquiry where your project is labeled as a misguided project. The big aha comes when you realize that the cost of fixing things at the end is far higher than investing in commissioning from the start. Like the iceberg analogy we looked at earlier, it may not be easy to see on the surface, but when you see the horror stories like Muskrat Falls, it becomes clear that organizations must protect themselves from disaster by investing in mature commissioning processes from the start. Commissioning is not just about the technical details, it's about the financial and time cost of rework, delays, and the risk of failure. And when you see these case studies and the possibility of being dragged through the coals publicly, it's much easier to see that commissioning is not an expense, but as a way to save money, save time, and reduce risk on projects. So we've covered a lot of good information in this presentation, but what's next? How do you actually improve the maturity of your commissioning processes for better project outcomes? If you had a more proactive approach to risk on projects to identify potential issues earlier and implement solutions earlier when it's easier and cheaper to address them, do you think this would save time and money on your projects? If you had a standard commissioning process to follow on projects, so you didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time, so you can follow the same approach to commissioning across all your projects, do you think this would result in efficiencies and cost savings? If you approach commissioning as a strategic tool to reduce risk on projects rather than just testing at the end, do you think this would save time and money on your projects? Do you think you would have a better chance of being successful with projects when you start projects with the end in mind and focus on the end goal of delivering high quality assets that can be used for decades of reliable operation rather than the current construction-led approach that focuses only on installation? It's difficult for me to cover all the aspects of commissioning in a short presentation like this, and sometimes it can feel like drinking from a fire hose when trying to understand commissioning, which is why we help organizations sort through the details and make the right decisions for projects and help them review the maturity of their commissioning processes, identify any gaps that are costing them money, and implement improved commissioning processes to avoid any unnecessary delays on projects. The Industrial Commissioning Association offers a progression path to take organizations to the level of maturity they need for successful projects. For organizations that are new to commissioning and need a proven process to follow, and for organizations already involved in commissioning that recognize they need new processes for improved project performance. We've got training programs to elevate your project team's capabilities to implement the commissioning best practices outlined in the ICA Global Commissioning Standard and to deliver the results you expect to see on your projects, and so that you can add to your corporate bottom line. It can take a long time for organizations to get the right plans in place for commissioning when they try to do this on their own. It took me 10 years to figure all this stuff out. And organizations can make the transition much quicker with the products and services that we offer for a new approach to completing projects to save time and money. We've got the resources you need for a complete commissioning readiness assessment to review the maturity of your commissioning plans and close any gaps you might have so you're ready for commissioning success. When you're first starting a project, it's a choice you make right at the beginning. Are you going to take a proactive approach to commissioning and start with the end in mind to proactively address risk and complete projects as efficiently as possible? Or are you just going to roll the dice with your fingers crossed to see how things turn out in the end, hoping your project doesn't get dragged through the media as another one of the 9 out of 10 projects that fail to meet expectations? It's easy to get started. Let's review your commissioning readiness and assess the maturity of your commissioning plans. During the review, if we find that you don't have any issues and you already have robust plans for commissioning, then at least you'll know and you'll be confident you're taking the right steps. But if you do have any gaps in your plans that are going to result in costly mistakes later to fix, wouldn't you like to know that now? All you have to do is click the link below this video or visit www.icxa.net/assess. Either will take you to a short questionnaire where you can tell me a bit about your projects. And once you submit your information, you can then book a time to review your projects and we'll review the level of maturity of your commissioning plans. During the call, I'll review your project details and I'll identify any gaps in your commissioning plans. If there's any gaps, I'll tell you exactly what steps to take to fix your plans, so you'll know exactly what to do to improve your organization's project success. And if you need any help implementing anything, we've got the products and services to make this as easy as possible for you and your team, so you can have world-class commissioning on your projects and so you can achieve commissioning excellence on your projects. So get started at the link below this video. Schedule a time to meet, and I'll personally evaluate the maturity of your commissioning plans and identify if there's any room for improvement and answer any questions that you have about commissioning. If you have any other questions before we meet, feel free to contact us at info@icxa.net and we'll respond right away. Thanks for watching, and I'm looking forward to helping you deliver commissioning excellence on your projects.